I once told Optimus I killed for the sake of killing. I wanted to make him hurt me, you see, because when he hurts others, he hurts himself. And the thing is, when those words were in my head, I didn't think I meant them. But when they left my mouth, I realized that I did. If the world thinks you're a monster, what does it matter? The world is wrong. But when you start to think of yourself as a monster... I came to hate the person I'd become, and I decided that the best way to leave that person behind, maybe the easiest way, was to become an Autobot.
That dialogue defines the impetus of how one of modern media's most iconic villains became one of his universe's greatest protagonists. I love Megatron's redemption arc because of how nuanced it is. He really has to work for it, and I wanted to gush about it for literal years, so why not now? First, some background. This is the Megatron from the original IDW comics continuity, which ran from 2005 to 2018, meaning that while he began as an alternate take on G1 Megatron, he, as well as the rest of the universe, wound up taking some inspiration from the Aligned continuity. Fans of Prime and Cyberverse, for example, will recognize his origins as a downtrodden miner who took a stand against a corrupt government before losing his way. The key difference here being that he was far more of a scholar than those other incarnations, writing several theses outlining reforms that would bring equality to Cybertron, as well as poetry under a pseudonym, one of which is later revealed to be Ultra Magnus' favourite. In fact, Megatron initially abhorred violence, opting to hide under a table when a fight broke out while talking to a friend, Impactor, in his youth. Even when he was repeatedly arrested for spreading his rhetoric, he remained a pacifist, until one day a cop decided an incarcerated Megatron was the perfect outlet to relieve his stress. While the cop in question, Whirl, was later caught and reprimanded, this act, the realization that he would be looked down on even when he was at his lowest point, is what created the Megatron you know. Another thing that sets the comics apart from most other iterations of the Transformers, the key exceptions being animated and the later seasons of Cyberverse, is that the majority of the run was dedicated to how Transformer society developed after the end of the Great War. Megatron did not take his defeat lying down, though, and concocted a scheme that through the fragile stability the Autobots, newly returned civilian population and Starscream had forged with an attempt to restart the war. He threw the fledgling government into chaos and caused severe damage to the Sol City left after the war itself before he was defeated and detained, and all he achieved was giving Starscream an opening to take control of Cybertron through politicking and guile instead of his own violence, something Starscream wastes no time mocking him about in the aftermath. This brings us to the birth of Autobot Megatron during a crossover event between the two main ongoing series at the time called Dark Cybertron, in which Shockwave set into motion a plan he'd been building up to for the last 8 years of continuity, an event which saw him come within inches of his dream of ensuring Cybertron's survival for eternity at the cost of the rest of the universe. As part of the scheme, he had Megatron broken out of prison for access to the space bridge technology inside of his body. The ensuing battle led to Megatron being ripped in half by Galvatron, who was a separate person in this continuity, after allying with the Autobots in an enemy of my enemy deal. He's saved by Bumblebee, who brings him back to the main party composed of Autobots, Decepticons, and the unaffiliated alike. Megatron announces his plan to summon Decepticon reinforcements and overwhelm Shockwave through sheer force, collateral damage be damned, but here Bumblebee points out the long-standing hypocrisy of his actions. For all this talk of fighting for freedom and equality, he was just a brute and his speeches were just an excuse for that brutality. More time around the Autobots in his vulnerable state gives Megatron time to reflect. Bumblebee was right, and the fact that he had lost to Starscream of all people reminded him of what he used to write, that change should be brought about by changing minds, not via oppression. Once he's repaired, he puts himself under Bumblebee's command during the counteroffensive and is further weaned away from his violent tendencies when the little guy convinces him not to take revenge on an injured Galvatron, only to be shot in the back by Shockwave. But in the face of a near godlike Shockwave, Megatron declares Bumblebee a friend and admits openly that he was wrong, taking on the Autobot insignia. He's saved by the appearance of Optimus and the later appearance of the spaceship Lost Light, and when the dust settles, tells Optimus that he truly wants to change and submits himself to a court trial for his crimes. But as I said in the opening, Megatron doesn't change immediately. While he does want to make amends and refuses to escape when rogue Decepticons try to free him, he asks to be tried on one of Cybertron's moons so that if the trial turns south for him, as it does when Starscream of all people defends him by claiming he was a violent nutjob who had no idea what he was doing, he can invoke an obscure clause that a defendant could demand judgment by the Knights of Cybertron, Cybertron's version of Saints or King Arthur's Knights. He says finding them is how he wants to make amends, not by sitting in jail humiliated, and is put in charge of the Autobots currently searching for them, the crew of the aforementioned Lost Light. That said, he's forced to fuel using false energon, a weak and toxic variant of energon meant to keep him weak in both body and mind. Megatron's two-mindedness shows through on board as well. On one hand, he was a far better captain than the previous one, Rodimus, even giving perennial drunk trail cutter a stable job to keep him focused and later teaching classes so the crew understands more about the Knights, but he was still thinking of ways to escape if need be, such as doing private research into his internal space bridge technology. He also remained quick to anger and violence, turning on his crew when he became the prime suspect in a situation where the crewmates began disappearing. Then, when his name was cleared and a new threat to a third party was revealed, he ordered his crew to abandon them because he saw no need to risk himself for another, only to be told that that was what being an Autobot was all about, and if he didn't understand that, none of his attempts to change meant anything. It's also during this arc that the quote that opened this video occurs, when explaining his change of heart to Ravage, a Decepticon who snuck aboard the ship to discern if his change was genuine and to put him out of his misery if so. Ultimately, he makes the right choice, even volunteering to be one of the two bots needed to traverse poisonous matter in open space to fix the issue. Eventually. But even then he keeps plotting. He steals force field technology from a body found along the way, as well as something capable of traversing time in case he needs to make an escape. But his next challenge is to stay on the sidelines when a rogue Autobot goes back in time to kill him as soon as he was forged, thus preventing the war from ever happening. Naturally, he's horrified when he realizes what's happening, and starts a fight in an attempt to go back and fix the issue himself. Due to a so-called time phone, the present-day cast is kept up to date with the past as events transpire. He's restrained only to be shocked again when ultimately Rewind, one of the most innocent bots on the team, is the one to kill his past self instead. Rewind is an archivist, and his recorded footage was being replaced with videos of the alternate timeline in which Megatron died throughout the entire arc. In that world, he says, the universe was saved, but Cybertron itself became even more of a dystopia than it used to be. The original Megatron is revived, and the crew celebrates a job well done, but understandably, given the news of what his life means for the universe as a whole, Megatron is too shaken to share in the revelry. The next milestone in his change is a visit to the world of the Necrobot. The Necrobot is a mythical Grim Reaper figure in Transformers mythology, so Megatron is at first skeptical of reports that the ship has found what appears to be his homeworld, but when Rodimus declares that he's pieced together a route to Cyber Utopia, the location of the Knights, he orders a detour to the former to buy himself more time. As it turns out, the Necrobot is real. He's not a supernatural being, however, simply another archivist who travels the universe and records the death of the Transformers. For anyone that was murdered, he plants a flower containing some of their data by a statue of the one who killed them. Megatron privately goes to see his own statue, and any further thoughts of escaping his judgment are obliterated when he sees a veritable sea of blue flowers awaiting him. The next element of the old Megatron he needs to face is his instinct to answer everything with violence. Getaway, arguably the worst Autobot and maybe even one of the worst people in the entire mythos, emotionally manipulates another naive Autobot, Tailgate, into performing neurosurgery on Megatron with a gadget he claims will cure his evil. The gadget is fake, obviously, and Getaway's plan is for Megatron to kill Tailgate and ruin the good reputation he's slowly been building up. It almost works too, with only the intervention of Tailgate's best friend and future boyfriend Cyclonus, and I could make another video about how well these two go together, saving his life. But the fact that it almost works is enough for Megatron to swear off violence entirely. Even when a monstrous transformer called Sunder is unleashed on the ship, he tries to reason with him and is almost killed for his inaction until saved by Tailgate himself. Afterwards, he coordinates a rescue operation on another planet while staying on the ship so as to not be tempted into more combat, only to be disgusted when he realizes that the rest of the crew didn't tell him that the planet's inhabitants were organics and not other Transformers. Supremacy was a big part of his ideology after all, and even after spending some time in a human shell and admitting they weren't as weak as he thought, that part of him hasn't completely changed. Things take a turn for the worse when he's one of the few crewmates subjected to a psychic attack that makes him experience their worst fears. The shock makes him lash out once more, even preparing to fire a now removed fusion cannon at the one who tried to help him. He leaves in disgust, but joins the other afflicted and their friends to find the source of the attack, only to realize it was a trick to get them off the ship that has now been hijacked by Getaway and the rest of the crew, who are disgusted with Megatron's presence all along. Megatron and co are abandoned on a planet about to be attacked by the Decepticon Justice Division, a secret police consisting of Decepticon fanatics once handpicked by Megatron and are now here to seek revenge on who they think betrayed them. While searching for any supplies they can use to defend themselves with, one of the crew finds two things: a teleporter that can get all mechanical life forms off the planet, and several chambers containing injured organic life. Faced with the inevitable death at their doorstep, the crew decides to leave, and thus leave the organics to their fate at the hands of the xenophobic Decepticon army, but Megatron of all people objects. attacks. The greatest fear he experienced back on the ship was the sound of every organic being he'd ever killed screaming at once, and now that he finally understands that all life is equal, he gives a speech that convinces the others to stay behind. After a failed attempt to surrender to the leader of the DJD to ensure the safety of the others, that he only survives due to the arrival of a third party that also wants him dead, an injured Megatron returns to base and asks the others to spend their last moments with their loved ones instead of wasting it in combat. When the others ignore him and fight anyway, he refuses to join in, both due to his newfound pacifism and also out of fear that if he started fighting again, he would return to the old Megatron and never come back, no matter how much false energon he took. Ratchet admits that there's no such thing. His energon was just modified to taste rotten, and as such there was nothing changing the way Megatron thought. He truly came to all of his conclusions and changes by himself. This, along with seeing how much his new friends are suffering, convinces him to finally take to the battlefield himself. He takes on the entire Decepticon Justice Division single-handedly and brings back all of his abandoned escape plans to help him do so instead, using force fields to trap him and them inside a sphere and unleashing a space-rich technology in the form of a black hole to wipe them all out, raging that he had finally found a place to belong and that if he could no longer be an Autobot, he'd gladly die a Decepticon. He's even reluctant to leave when Rodimus offers him a last-second escape, and even when he takes a lifeline, he tries to leave as a lost cause before the sight of a long-lost friend convinces him to once again leave the Autobots. Megatron gets a metaphorical chance to redo his initial revolution the right way in a future arc when the crew is sent to the alternate universe in which he never existed. This time, Megatron uses a balance of pacifism and action, ordering the Autobots to surrender when surrounded by the ruling party, but just as easily breaking free of his restraints when it became clear that they weren't going to be treated fairly. When meeting with the resistance movement, he left talks of plans to the other Autobots and met with the mutilated protesters instead, and when things escalated into full-out war, he started taking inventory of the available weapons and defenses to protect the innocents as they fled, while Rodimus was more focused on returning to their homeworld. Rodimus instead accuses him of simply wanting to stay in a world where he had no sentence looming over his head, and while he later admits to have entertained the idea, he says he wants to stay with the crew as they're his conscience. Ultimately, he's tricked by his mentor into staying behind while the others go home, but he takes this opportunity to speak to more of the disenfranchised. He becomes a leader of the downtrodden once more, but instead of riling them up, he simply talks to them and espouses his new philosophy, peace through empathy. Megatron returns for the finale of the Lost Light story, having spent the duration of the original war's time frame protecting people from the Functionists, the aforementioned ruling party, and following them after they turned Cybertron itself into a transformer for them to pilot to undercut or minimize the damage from the schemes. The planet, dubbed Primus, eventually crosses over into the main timeline with him in tow. After saving his friends from their own predicament, he fills them in on the situation, and just as with the Organics in their first battle with the Functionists, refuses to take the easy way out. He doesn't allow the other Autobots' plan of nuking Primus because his surface is still populated. The Autobots are able to defeat the Functionists with the creation of 12 new matrices of leadership, one of which Megatron is unable to open due to his remaining self-doubt. However, with the main crew discovering that the Knights of Cybertron are long dead, Megatron is ordered to attend a trial under another council and is found guilty, even after testimonies from the Lost Light crew and Rodimus lies that he was able to open the Matrix in an attempt to give Megatron some religious clout. Megatron is doomed to one of two fates: execution or solitary confinement for eternity. Even then, all Megatron has to say is that he deserved worse. Many people cite Zuko from Avatar as a redemption arc done well for good reason, and has always upset me not enough people read Megatron's story to say the same for him. Megatron was an absolute monster despite his initial good intentions. He lied and betrayed people, he mentally and physically tortured Autobots and Decepticons alike, and even tried to reignite the war out of sheer spite. But at the same time, he was willing to change. He realized he had long since lost his way and tried to correct himself, and as this essay has shown, he wasn't perfect. The writers didn't wave a magic wand and turn him into a flawless Superman figure. He had to work hard for it. He had to confront his old beliefs, own up to his past mistakes, figure out what he truly wanted in life, and then work even harder to make sure he didn't relapse. I rushed through years of storytelling, so I urge you to read Dark Cybertron and Lost Light, which are the two main stories mentioned in this video, yourselves. Now that IDW is losing the Transformers license, they're releasing a lot of jumbo packs, so you should be able to get them for a good price too. I'd love to see more of Autobot Megatron someday. Other stories have teased at a protagonist Megatron, such as Prime and Cyberverse, but never committed to it. He's such a fascinating concept, and the result is a supremely engaging protagonist, especially since this change was happening at the same time that Optimus became much muddier. That's right, at the time of release, Megatron was more of a hero than Optimus Prime. Try and wrap your head around that. But for now, I'll content myself with a Shattered Glass incarnation, which is a universe where everyone's moralities are flipped from the get-go. Please let me know what you thought of this video and what you thought of Autobot Megatron. A lot of people were skeptical of his change back when these stories were being printed, and were worried that his past would be retconned or made more pitiful, but none of that happened, and as you can no doubt tell, I think everything worked out great. Did this change of heart work for you too? Would you like to see this take on him again? Thanks for making it to the end of the video, and as always, have a great day.